for this conversation. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and names on here, and also a lot of folks that I maybe haven't met yet, but I hope to meet you soon. Yeah, for those of you whom I have had the pleasure of getting to meet and chat with before, you probably know that this kind of thing, today's topic, is something I like to nerd out about. And so hopefully the fact that I have been nerding out about this kind of thing for many, many years is something that can help me be of use to all of you. So hope to be helpful. Yes, I see Eternity, you're right. I'm hearing some background noise
I'm
as
shutting
well.
down. Sorry, guys.
No problem. So yeah, basically and Tim, I really want to thank you for your service on the Arts and Culture Advisory Board. Just to have your voice and perspective as someone who understands arts and culture and the voice of individual artists and creatives and organizations and creative businesses has been really immensely valuable. And thanks for being someone who understands what the purpose of the Opportunity Fund has been. And because you brought it up, I'll just mention we have had an opportunity to do a few cycles and experiment with monthly cycles last fall. This spring, we've been pretty slammed with the arts and culture plan and some other things. So one cycle this spring, but still, if you look at it, basically between a couple of inaugural projects last spring, 3 cycles last fall, and a cycle this spring. In about 1 year, we've been able to do multiple cycles infusing $1.6 million to individual artists, nonprofits, and also informal groups for projects. So excited about that. Hoping and looking forward to doing more in the future. And you will see a little bit later, we'll walk through a sample budget from that we used for our Spring Opportunity Fund cycle. So I am going to do a couple things. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then also I will just ask for your patience on if you're putting anything in the chat. I don't think I'll be able to see it while I'm sharing my screen and everything. So I'll just ask Sethu and Tim to bring any timely questions to my attention. Otherwise, maybe we can address them during the Q&A. Okay. So thank you all, and just bear with me for a moment while I share screen. Okay, is everyone seeing a title slide that says crafting a strong proposal budget?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for confirming. Okay, so not only is this about proposal about or crafting a budget, but obviously this is about how to craft a strong one. And so as Tim talked about, I think what maybe isn't always, part of what folks are thinking about is how useful a budget can be in telling your story about what your vision for a project or program is, what your goals are, what your values are, and of course, how you're going to get it done, and the fact that you know how you're going to get it done. So hopefully, as we go through this, you'll see that the budget can be a really useful tool. It's not just for a prospective funder, but it really is a valuable tool for you that also can be helpful as you're seeking or raising funds. So why create a budget? So you can read this, but I'll just kind of, share some color, of course, as well. A budget is a really useful tool to help you think through the details of your project. So even if you may have, have the vision, you've got your objectives, you've got an idea of how you're going to do it, and you've thought of a lot of things, what it can actually help you do as you go through the nitty-gritty components of a budget is it helps you flesh those out further, and it can help you to think or realize that there may be some things you haven't thought of yet, and that would be very useful to flesh out. And so among those are, how much this project is going to cost, how much you think you can raise or earn. So when I say revenue throughout this conversation, I'm going to be talking about both earned revenue, so things you can earn through whether it's ticket sales or merchandise or services, different things like that, as well as contributed revenue or funds that you can raise, whether it's grants or donations, things like that, sponsorships. And so you can identify those two things, and you can illustrate all of the granular, not all, but a lot of the granular details of your project. So how you're going to get something done, who are the people involved, how you're paying them, please pay them, but whether, you're working with volunteers as well, which is also great. What spaces you need, are you renting things, are you buying things? How are you promoting it? A lot of times folks forget about marketing and promotion. How are you going to get the word out about this? And how are you going to reach people that you are hoping to reach? Not only that, but are you going to charge for things, or are you going to provide things for free? There's pros and cons to both ways, and you might be doing a mix. And that may affect how you're going to reach your target audience or serve your target constituency. And also just generally conveying that you've been really thoughtful about how you've planned the project or the program, and it shows that you're prepared to do this project successfully. And as you referenced, Tim, it's not just to funders, but any collaborators, right? If you're working with someone, they might be interested. Hopefully they would ask, like, what's your budget like? How's this gonna go down? And it really is something that can demonstrate a lot of the information that any of your partners, whether they're funding partners or other partners, would want to know. Also, I'm just going to say, so I'm going to ask Sethu, if you can give me like a time signal, if you're like, this is taking too long and I need to wrap it up, let me know, because sometimes I can wax poetic about even things like budgets.
We got you, Priya. I'll ping I'll text you.
Okay. So okay. Thank you. I feel like I think like we started just a few minutes ago, so I'll try to keep, shorten this part so we've got plenty of time for like Q&A. But so what do funders want to know? Again, so far we've already talked a bit about like why a budget is, or creating a budget, a thorough one, is useful to you. But then also, as you're thinking about what to convey to funders, here are some things that funders want to know. So again, how are you thinking about your project? It's not like you have to be thinking about it a certain way necessarily, except that, a funder would like to know that you've really thought it through, but how are you approaching it? And also, of course, that you've really thought through details. Sometimes if there are gaps in a budget, it conveys a sense that you maybe haven't thought through the details. That doesn't necessarily mean in reality that you haven't thought about it, but if it's not showing up in the budget and it looks like a gap, that doesn't necessarily send a great signal. Like if you leave something out, like you've talked about a venue that you're gonna do a performance at, or you're gonna do a show or an exhibition at, and there's literally no mention of a venue in the budget, that is a gap that then makes folks wonder, like, what are they gonna do about a venue, and how much is it gonna cost, and how are they gonna cover that? So thinking through the details, the fact that you've done that, of course, just a general understanding of how this project is going to work. So the overall project revenues and expenses, as well as how you plan to use the requested funds. So sometimes those are the same, meaning you may be requesting the full amount of your project from a particular funder, but a lot of times you're requesting a portion of it, and a prospective funder still really likes to understand, in my experience, likes to understand the totality of the project, even if it's a particular piece that you're seeking funding for, like certain expenses. So this helps them understand the big picture. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, how does the money match up with what you've described in your narrative? So usually you've got some kind of narrative description of your project, and whether you've answered questions or if it's more free form, but you've got some kind of narrative. And then the budget helps anyone, any kind of partner, funder, or otherwise, to understand how the finances fit with what you've described. And then sometimes if there's a mismatch or like kind of what seems like maybe a glaring omission or something, that can be a red flag as well, that makes someone kind of just question, oh, have they really thought about it? Or do they really have the expertise or the experience to get it done successfully? So that leads to the very last one here, is of course that this is a great way to demonstrate you know how to do this. And even if you haven't done this particular thing before, if that you or your team, or you've researched it really well, that shows that you've really thought about it and you understand like what it takes to, do X type of project that you're proposing. So this is a long list that I'm not going to read to you. You can just take a look, but really it's just here to kind of, put on your radar, or just kind of summarize some of the many types of expenses that you might have for your project, whether or not you're seeking funding for them from a funder. But the headline here, of course, is really double check with the prospective funder what types of expenses are eligible. And that's because even as you're crafting your total project budget, which we'll get to in a bit, when you're deciding what you want to seek funding for, this is really critical because, sometimes, I've seen really great projects where, unfortunately, the component or components that the proposal's requesting funds for are not within the realm of what was eligible for that particular grant opportunity. And that can be a real shame, because it may be that there was something else that would have been totally in line, with the eligibility for this grant. And so we understand, like, sometimes you've already got certain things covered maybe by some other funding source, and it's such and such a thing that is what you're trying to get covered. But again, it's really important to check and make sure you're really clear on what's eligible and what's not, so that you are, conserving your energy, not necessarily pursuing an opportunity that isn't going to wind up being a good fit after all. So again, this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list, even though it's long, but it's just to illustrate some different types of things that you might see as eligible or ineligible expenses from particular funders. So this slide isn't about just a budget, but the reason I've included it is because it is, again, about the idea that a budget is part of your overall message, right? And your overall proposal and your planning, even if a proposal aside, like even if you're not seeking funds from anyone else, even if you're self-funding, as you're planning to do a project, these are the kinds of things, some of these are among the things that you would want to think about, include in your messaging and your promotional messaging. So, who are you? Like, what is it about you or your team that makes you, a fit for this thing that you want to do? And even if it's not something you've done before, that's okay. You may have amongst you and your teammates, or even just in your background, a kind of skill set or a collection of experiences and things that just makes sense as to why this is the next thing you want to do. And of course, you need to tell that story, but that's an important piece of the picture. Obviously, as specific as you can be about what kind of funding you're seeking and what's the project, and what pieces are you seeking funding for. And then again, kind of what makes this project special, unique, or timely and relevant, not just for you, but for whoever your target audiences or your constituencies that you're aiming to serve, whoever they are. And like, what compels you to want to do this? I always think of it as like, what is the project? Why do you want to do it? Like, why this project and why now? And then how, obviously. But it's like, if you can tell that story well, it helps to make funding your project a no-brainer. So again, how will you accomplish it? Is it feasible? What are the logistics, timeline, budget, all of that. And again, these are things that the budget can help convey. And then of course, partners, supporters, things like that. So this is more of like a big picture look at what kinds of things are really helpful information to convey, and even for yourself to just kind of get mapped out, and then think about these questions in relation to the budget, have them in the back of your mind as you're creating a budget. So I know for some of you or many of you, these might be things that you already know, but I think it's always helpful to just have a quick reminder, try to give yourself time. I know that's easier said than done because everybody's really busy. And a lot of times, especially artists and creatives, are doing this on top of other jobs and things. If you can at least start earlier, that way you've got enough time to put forth the best proposal you can, including the budget. Reading the guidelines, obviously, asking and providing everything that's requested or everything that you can, even if things aren't, required, like supporting materials. If a funder invites you to submit or attach supporting materials that will, again, help you tell your story, do it. It is the more opportunity that you have to tell that story of what you want to do, why, and how. I think take folks up on it. Not everybody does. And then, of course, describing your vision and your goals, and being as clear as possible and providing as much. I don't, when I say as much detail, I don't mean just sort of volume of detail, but because being concise is helpful, but just being clear and specific about what you're doing, how you're going to do it, and of course with a budget, how much it costs, or how much
Priya,
you think it will cost.
Can I add something in there that I've heard you talk about too? Is also don't presume that the grantor won't answer questions in advance. They want to read the best review, the best applications and budgets possible. And in this last round for, say, the Infusion Fund, readers from the city of Charlotte did look at applications and did work one-on-one with applicants in advance to do budgets. And if you were here for when we the session we did with Dara Silver from the North Carolina Arts Council, they will do that as well. They just won't do it last minute. So if you want to avail yourself of asking questions of the grantor, just make sure you're doing it a couple weeks out, and that you're not, if it's due on a Friday, you're not reaching out to them at 3:00 on a Thursday asking them, would you please review my grant or my budget?
Yeah, Tim, thanks for raising that. And I echo that, because certainly, we try our best to provide that guidance and assistance or answer any questions to the best of our capacity. And also want to shout out, because I know there are folks on this call who did that through the Opportunity Fund cycle. And so kudos to you for doing that, because again, not everybody does it. So thanks for, taking us up on that opportunity. This is kind of a little bit more again about creating a realistic budget. So again, that's part of what folks are looking for, right? Not only other partners like collaborators that you might work with, but certainly prospective funders. Because what they're trying to get a sense of is, does this seem like a realistic way to get it done? So for example, some things, and Tim, I know you probably can attest to this, that, there'll be budgets where there might be some amount of money budgeted for something, and we're like, gosh, that doesn't seem like enough, like that's not enough has been budgeted perhaps to cover a particular venue rental, or maybe to cover marketing costs, or, a certain type of activity where, again, we really work with arts and culture practitioners as well. And, folks who have a range of experiences where, folks have experience with, say, I don't know, how much does it cost to do a film shoot? Like, or how much does it cost to do certain other activities? And so, we do try to have folks who have that familiarity so that we have a realistic sense of whether something's feasible. And so we are looking for a realistic budget. Does this look feasible the way that, that you have budgeted it? As I mentioned, paying yourself and others, I know, again, that isn't always possible, and sometimes it really just depends on how much funding you can earn or raise. But we certainly, with the Infusion Fund and the Arts and Culture Advisory Board, really does prioritize artists and creatives and people getting paid for their work. That said, it's also great if you are working with volunteers, and you've got in-kind services and things being donated, as I've mentioned here as well. That's great too. Please list that if you've got folks who are contributing any kind of time, work, or other assets, to include that. Also, revenue potential. Something that comes up oftentimes is that maybe maybe there are opportunities to earn some revenue that you may not have thought about. And as you complete this, you might realize that, oh, this actually could be a kind of revenue stream. And so the budgeting, the actual process of going through creating a budget could sometimes help you think through those things. So that's something that is really helpful to look at. And of course, as I mentioned, marketing and promotion. Unfortunately, a lot of times, we focus on the actual creation of the art or the, whatever that experience is. And sometimes the marketing or promotion is a bit of an afterthought, or we think about doing it, but maybe there's not much budget dedicated to it. And really encourage everyone to think about putting not an insignificant amount of funding in your budget toward promoting this thing that you're working so hard to create. And then there you see Tim's point about, if you have any questions, please reach out to the funder, and especially if they say, reach out to us with questions, or then take them up on it.
Priya, I was just going to add one thing. I remember in a conversation that you led one time with too, is I think it oftentimes artists or people that are putting their work in. By the way, am I clear now? I switched mics. Is this sounding better? They often don't put in a line item to pay themselves. And, I think passion can only get you so far. So when a funder is saying, hey, I'm going to give you $20,000, 25, 30, they want to make sure that you're not under duress and you can finish out, because, I think we want to see that you're treating yourself as a business, but also that at the end of the day, if you're not getting paid, you might prioritize something other than working on this project that they've given you money for. And that's just as dangerous as not marketing it. So.
Yeah, I think kind of just generally folks are, or from a funder perspective, looking at like, what is the likelihood that this is going to come to completion, and so obviously, they're aware that the availability of the funding is one of the things, but they're also looking at other things like what Tim just talked about. Okay, so here are some best practices about budgets. I'm gonna just kind of, let you browse this, and as Tim said, we'll provide this afterwards so you have it as a reference. But again, just like thinking about the big picture, try not to put padding in, because usually panelists can spot padding because they've done these kinds of projects before. And then yeah, definitely try to use whatever format the funder has requested. I mean, you may have done a budget in another format, which is great, but unfortunately, I think just when funders are looking at, usually, or not usually, but oftentimes you're looking at a whole bunch of them, so it makes it more it increases their ability to really evaluate these when they're looking at things all in a similar format. And I'll just touch on this. So the one at the bottom, oftentimes, I think usually in arts and culture, especially if it's nonprofit, usually a project budget will balance, or should be balanced. Hopefully you're not going to be in the red. But sometimes there might be some additional revenue generated that you would have left over. So I think it'll depend on the funder again, and you may not be applying as a nonprofit, and that's fine too. So if you're trying to generate funds that you can use to something else in the future, I think that's okay. You should definitely check with the funder on whether they expect the budget to be balanced for the grant itself. But if they're fine with that not being the case, I always encourage folks to at least put in the notes what you plan to use those remaining funds for. If you do turn a profit, do you want to apply that toward a future project or what have you? And then especially if you're a nonprofit organization, indicating what you would like to roll that forward into is really important. One quick note, and I think we're close to being able to switch to the template, looking at the sample budget, I should say, is fiscal sponsorship. So if you're already familiar with this, don't worry about it, but I'm just noting it because we've found through the Opportunity Fund process that not everyone has come across this. So generally speaking, foundations, they can only disperse grants to nonprofits, to other nonprofits. That's an IRS thing. So it's not them wanting to be mean thing, but it's like they have to comply with their IRS regulations to maintain their status. And so they have to do grants to nonprofits. So for individual artists or groups that are not nonprofits, they usually have to work with a fiscal sponsor, fiscal agent that can be the one that receives the funds and is essentially guaranteeing that the grant's going to be used the way it's going to be used. And so that's true of the infusion funds, as well as like the Foundation for the Carolinas and others. So that's just something to be aware of. And you would want to check with the prospective funder as to whether they have any parameters around who you could work with as a fiscal agent or fiscal sponsor. Like, do they have to be in the same state? Do they have to be a certain type of organization? In my experience, it's pretty flexible what type of nonprofit can serve as a fiscal sponsor. You may also want to work with one that is used to being a fiscal sponsor, or a fiscal agent. There are organizations that offer that and do that for a lot of folks. There is a fee associated with it because it's something that where they're doing some level of work and guaranteeing, on your behalf that the funds are going to be used the way you say they are. Okay. So I think we're ready to switch to the sample budget. So if you'll bear with me for a moment, please, I'm going to stop sharing this and start sharing the budget form. While I'm doing that, I don't know, Sethu and Tim, if there's anything you guys would like to add, or if there are any questions in the chat that I can't see.
Yeah, there are two questions I'll hit right now. The first one is from Eternity Phillips, and she was asking when you're filling out a grant, should you mention other grants you're applying for? And Eternity, if I haven't hit the full question, please feel free to come off mute and ask it yourself. I got it now. It's should you mention other grants you're applying for in an application? Does applying for other grants negatively impact your application?
That is a great question. I am gonna give an answer, and then Tim, if you have a different answer or something, feel free to chime in, like a different answer from your perspective. I would say generally, yes, mention them, and I think that, like in my experience at multiple grant making organizations, we would rather know what funding opportunities you're pursuing, especially if the amount that you're seeking for that grant isn't going to cover everything and you need additional funding to make the project happen. That is something, and you'll see this in this. Do you guys see a budget, like an Excel sheet? Okay, great, thanks. You see that an example of that right here, like in this budget, where if you do need additional funds, it's really helpful to know what are you pursuing, even if you know the timeline, like we've applied for this much from this organization and we expect to find out in this month, whatever month it is. And that helps the funder that you're currently seeking funds from to, again, understand the big picture, understand that you are working to secure other funding as well. And again, it just adds to that sense of how feasible is this if you're seeking, other funding. If you're seeking other funding for overlapping funds, I can see how that may be something where you're like, well, if I'm seeking the entire amount of funding from this funder, but I'm also seeking funding from another funder, you don't want to deter this funder from giving you funding. I guess you could not mention it. I think the tricky part is that, let's say you request your full budget from X funder, but you also have requested it from Y funder. And then you get both, congratulations. When you're reporting back as to how you use the funds, how's that going to work? And do you really want to have kind of maybe unintentionally put yourself in a situation where you're not able to report accurately and truthfully on how the funds were used? I think that's like a not great scenario that I could see resulting from doing that. Tim, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's very situational. So if they're unrelated, if you've got two projects going and you're applying over here for this project and over there to another, you don't need to say that, because that doesn't say anything. I would balance that truth, being upfront, because part of this is getting the one-time grant is great. Making a reputation so that you're easier to grant from that grantor in the future is also important. So you don't want to get the money this time, but then sour the relationship because you weren't perceived as being truthful. To me, I would say there's two things. One is, if you've gotten other grants before, if other people have invested either in this project or in another similar project you've done, I would mention that, because that talks about your credibility. Makes them a safer investment. But the other is, I will say that, having looked at a lot of applications, I tend to look when you've got, hey, 100% of my project budget, I'm applying for this. I like to see that the grantee or the applicant has some skin in the game, or they have a plan of whether the project is going to proceed in some form or fashion if this grant doesn't come through, because that to me speaks to the passion and the determination to get it done. And even if you're saying, hey, I'm donating my time to this, I would at least want to see that you've got some skin in that game. Two quick, Priya, I'm going to save the two questions for after you go through the sheet, because I think it's really important. So journey and Alexandra, I see you, and I'll make sure that we get to those questions.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so I'm noting the time. So I think I'm going to try to just take like no more than 4 or 5 minutes to go through this and just to point out a few things. So then we can go to Q&A.
Yeah, Priya, one question: if you can hit view and do a full screen on this, we had a request to just be able to see the detail a little bit more.
Where is view? Sorry, I am
It's
not
right next to review up top. It's in between review and help in your main bar.
in my,
Like, you know, where you've got file, home, insert, page.
oh, you know what? This is what's the problem is my share screen is blocking my, here, let me, now I can see everything. Okay. Okay, yep, view and well, I don't have like a full, you're saying go to view and choose what, Tim?
You know what? Maybe just increase the size, like hit Control or Shift plus.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not seeing like a.
Sorry, if you go to the bottom of your screen, the bottom right, Priya, there's a little
Yeah.
cursor. You see 90%.
Yeah, just make that bigger.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, is that better? Should I make it
Beautiful.
bigger?
Beautiful.
That's great.
Okay. Okay, so just gonna try to point out a few things because again, we've now covered all like the main points. I'm just gonna point out some of the like illustrations of what we've already talked about. So here, this is an example for those of you who watched the webinar for the Spring Opportunity Fund cycle. This should look familiar because we covered this, but this is just an example. What you see here is, this isn't necessarily what, if you're building out your own budget and this is not for a proposal, this column, can you see that I've highlighted H? That's more like your overall, like what your overall project numbers should be. This, do you see like, I don't know, I want to make sure you guys are seeing that column H is highlighted in gray. So, okay, thanks. So that's like your overall revenues and expenses. In this example, again, not all templates are going to look like this, but they're probably going to look like a version of this. You see here, column D is this particular grant, like the money that you're seeking from this opportunity. And then column F is all the other funding that may be needed for your project or that you're going to earn. So here you can see that you've got this example is requesting $30,000 from the Opportunity Fund, and then everything else is blacked out here because it's not relevant. And then here in this side, you see other things indicated, okay? So you've got, there's individual contributions if you're seeking donations or you've already received donations, you know, foundation grants here, kind of getting to that, the question we were just talking about. You can see in this example, the applicant is planning to apply for an ASC Cultural Vision grant of $15,000, and they've put that there, so we're aware. And this is separate money from the $30,000 they're seeking from the Opportunity Fund. So then you also see you can put federal support or I know other types of support listed here. This in-kind section is where you can put, like here, this example is like they're working with the Blumenthal and there's some space, a value of space that's being contributed. So that value is here at $10,000. And very important, the note section. A lot of folks don't utilize the notes section, and I really, really encourage people to put in notes. I mean, put in even more notes than this example has if you can. This is where you can explain things that you may not have been able to fit into the narrative. And so that's helpful. So this is the value of space. This other grants, I mean, I think that it's just kind of here because it's a little tricky where to put that, but it could be, that might have been just like, it could have gone in foundation grants, or it could be some other type of grant. So you see that there's another grant here. Here is the earned income section. So again, I mentioned we're talking about both contributed, you know, income as well as earned income opportunities. In this case, the example is ticket sales. And what you can see here is there's money projected, and it's telling you it's not just the amount, right? Because what we need to know, we just like any funder, is how are you getting to that, right? What are you charging for the tickets? How many do you think you'll sell? And that's why this note is really helpful, because it shows that you think you're going to do 500. This person thinks they'll do 500 tickets at $10. But other things could go under earned income as well, right? Maybe you're providing a service that you earn something for. You know, maybe you're doing like you do consulting, or you teach some classes and you get earned income that way. That's going to go to this project. Or maybe maybe you're offering workshops as part of this project and people can pay to take those. Or again, maybe you're selling merchandise like tickets and tchotchkes and other things. Like, so you can put other kinds of earned income here. Here you see there's another thing, which is another type of income, which is sponsorship, and they've put that here and it says who it's from. So again, there's, there could be a lot more in here potentially. Also under in kind, this is where you could put, if you're putting, you're donating your time, for example, you could put that. Or if, volunteers are doing in kind, putting hours toward this project, you can list it under in kind as well. I'm going to keep going, so hopefully any questions we can answer, at the end. Because while this part of the revenues is important, usually there's even more detail in the expenses, and that's what we really need to see. So you'd want to put, again, as much detail that's clear, that's understandable in here. So here you've got salaries, program salaries, and wages. So that's expenses, that's like people, how you're paying people that specifically, are affiliated with this project, getting this project done. So, and it's helpful to know who they are. Now, sometimes you can put literally the person, exactly who that person is, if you've mentioned them in your proposal, or if there's like a group of them and you don't want to list all of them, that's fine. You can say something like this, artists and designers, but it tells you how many and how much you're paying each. That's really important to know, rather than just having this lump sum of $11,000. So again, you can put the notes in this column, or you can put it right here. You can also put things under administrative salaries. So perhaps there's some, percentage of the, let's say your organization has an executive director, or some other, like there's a percentage of work or time they're going to do. You can put that under here. If you're working with consultants or contractors, oftentimes there's a space for that. And here again, it's helpful to know what kind of consultant or contractor. So here it says curators, 2 of them. We see how much they're getting paid, and also installation labor. And one thing that's great about that is it tells us that you've thought of the fact that you need a curator and the fact that you need installation labor. Because sometimes, I have definitely seen, projects where an exhibition is going to be installed, but there's nothing about who's going to install it. And the fact that does cost money typically, unless people are really donating all of that work. So it's helpful to show that that's here. And again, it doesn't say how many people and how much. What it does say, because it's a large sum, most of the grant is being requested for this, see attached quote from installer. That helps us know that you've talked to someone. You didn't just make up $20,000. It's a quote you've received from a vendor, and and the fact that you've attached it is really helpful, because it helps with that transparency, and we can really see what you have been quoted for. Again, you can put other things down here, potentially, if they're allowable expenses for the grant, like a portion of employee benefits or other administrative expenses. There's something here, if you have travel expenses, include it. Fundraising expenses is kind of like, let's say, sometimes folks hire a grant writer to do something, or they work with a consultant to help them write a grant or do other kinds of fundraising. Maybe you've got some expenses associated with doing a fundraising event for this project. You could put those there. And then capital expenditures are things that have to do with, maybe it's like rent, or, it could be facility rental, or maybe it's some percentage of, I don't know, or maybe you're having to construct something for this project. So that could go there. This person, I mean, there's a few kinds of things that can go in multiple places. So that's not necessarily that big a deal, or you can always ask the funder where they want you to put that type of expense. But you can see here under overhead, that's where they've put rent for their facility. And here too, you can see there's a specific note about how long that facility is going to be rented for, and it's including load in and load out. What's helpful about them saying that is, you know, it illustrates that this person is aware that it's not just the amount of time that they're in there for performances or rehearsals, but there's time for load in and load out. So it's, again, one of those places that you can really show that you know how to get this done. So anyway, here you see some other specific examples of things that relate to things they want to do. So logo design, advertising, luckily they've included advertising. It happens to not be coming from this grant, but it's listed. So we know that they've thought of that. And then of course, AV and licensing. So I just point out a couple of things before we go to Q&A. In this example, as in most examples that I see, most budgets, it is balanced, where you see that this amount definitely, like, it's usually a funder is probably for a grant is going to want to see that it's budget, it's balanced. So you've got 30,000 and 30,000. And then here, you know, this column, the revenues and expenses match, and then the total revenue and expenses match as well. And anytime there's a gap, then there's going to be questions, basically. So hopefully you can address those questions. So I'll stop there, and I'm going to stop sharing and then turn it back over to you guys, to you, Tim.
All right, well, I'm going to leave you on spotlight, so you have our full attention. We've got four main questions. The first one is from Alexandra, and she asks what you would recommend people do to isolate or identify fiscal sponsors in Charlotte.
So there's a few things. So it depends if you feel like you need to work with something local or not, because a lot of times from the funder perspective, they don't necessarily care as long as it's a reputable organization, and they will ask you to provide the documentation of that organization, as well as a memorandum of understanding, usually, that is saying, where that organization is saying, yes, we agree to serve as the fiscal sponsor for this project, or the fiscal agent for this project. One national organization that is very reputable that does this, like, it's literally one of their main activities that they do, is Fractured Atlas. I don't know, maybe we can like follow up with a link or something like that, or drop it in the chat, but
yeah, I'm not going to include that in the follow-up.
Perfect. Yeah. But they are one that has been doing this for many, many years. I mean, also they're like a nationally well-known organization. A lot of funders are familiar with them. But again, it doesn't have to be them. I know that, like, locally, for example, ASC has done that. I don't think it's like a main thing that they do, but they have served as that sometimes. And then sometimes a community foundation will serve as that. I don't think the Foundation for the Carolinas does. I'm not really sure. But for example, I know that like the Knight Foundation, they work with the Miami Foundation, where their Knight is headquartered, and the Miami Foundation has served as a fiscal sponsor. I'm not really sure how that works, because they're also distributing the funds. But anyway, the point is they have, you know, a fee, and because they do hundreds of grants with Knight Foundation, they have an agreement to serve as a fiscal sponsor, a fiscal agent. One thing I will mention is, you absolutely, if you're working with, I'm not sharing that screen anymore, but if you think back to the budget that we were just looking at, if you are working with a fiscal sponsor or fiscal agent, absolutely put that in the budget and show what percentage they're charging you, and include that as a line item and explain that. Because most funders, they don't want you to pay that coming out of somewhere else. That should be part of the grant that you're requesting.
To answer your question, I don't think that foundation does that. I think they have a threshold, and
Mhm.
most of the funds I think that folks on this call will be going for don't meet
Okay.
that. I can attest that Charlotte is creative through the Knight Foundation, but has worked with the Miami Foundation before, and that was really easy to do. Related question, I'm going to jump it up in the is there a standard fee for a fiscal agent? And in your experience, what have you found that to be, Priya?
Yeah, I've seen anywhere from like 6% to 10%. I've heard it times 12. I would say that's high, like that's on the high side. And if anyone's quoting you like 12 or more, I would look for something lower. But I think that it's not uncommon for it to be like 10% or maybe a little bit less. When it is 6%, that's actually a pretty good deal. And I know that what Knight has, well, Tim, you might have this fresher in your mind than I from my Knight days, but I think that what they have negotiated with Miami Foundation is lower, and it's like 4% or 3%.
It was negligible. Like I
Yeah,
can't
it's
remember.
like really low.
And in fact, I think that in the case of the Knight Foundation, you get granted at X level, but you're really getting granted at X level plus the 4%. I think they're even paying the fee because we
They are.
essentially got the money
Yeah.
that we were promised we were going to get without anything off the top.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
so again, I think to your point is, while you may not want to feel weird about going with a larger institution like that, the more money they have, the lower the fee they can choose. So you might want to, they can sustain themselves on 4% if they've got tons and tons of money coming through there. So you just may want to bear that in mind.
Mhm.
I don't want to lose these other questions. The next one is from Journey, and Journey asked, I just got bumped down, so it was about paying yourself, essentially. So can nonprofits pay themselves from grants like an admin fee? So essentially, can you work paying yourself into the grant for your work?
So I want to make sure I'm clear on the question, Tim, because I feel like I heard two. Is it about
Let's let
nonprofits
Journey
or is
ask.
it about
So
individual
she
artists?
wrote, can nonprofits pay themselves from grants like administration fee? I'm interpreting that, and Journey, if I'm getting it wrong, I'm interpreting that as, can you pay yourself? So she's saying admin fee, but I think that's a project management fee for carrying out the project is how I'm interpreting that.
So depending on the grant, nonprofits, like it really is up to the specific grant guidelines whether an administrative fee is allowed. And typically, like where you might see a percentage that is stated that would be allowed. So they might, an eligibility guideline for something might say, an administrative fee of no more than 15% is allowed, or 10%. They might call it administrative overhead. So that's that's kind of called like indirect expenses is one term for it. But another thing, like a different way to think about it is like, I don't want to take up time pulling that budget back up, but if you think about that section where it was like administrative personnel or administrative salaries, let's say your executive director or something is, or just, your regular staff is going to be spending some portion of their time doing that project. You can put that too. Like a lot of times that'll be allowable, where it might be, this person's going to spend 10% of their time on this project. And so you put that role, whoever the role is, or the name, usually the role is fine, and then put what percent of their time they're going to be doing on this project. And then you can put that percentage of their salary on into the line item. So I would say what I see is that's the way that nonprofits like pay themselves, like they're paying for the percentage of the work that is corresponds to that particular project and grant.
Excellent. Thank you. Multiple people asked, and I'm sure you're going to say yes, if we can share the template, the budget template that you showed.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Great. And then Alejandra asked, I'd like to know, oh wait, sorry, she asked me a couple of things. She was asking, oh gosh, but if your organization does not have employees, but you want to give a value to the time that the members of the organization dedicate to the project, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it kind of doesn't matter where you put them. So I'm just looking at this for my own example. Like, you could still put it under like program salary, or if not salaries, you could put it under consultant or contract services. So, and then you can just put like, let's say as an example, let's say you're a collective of dancers and it's not an organization that has like paid employees, but you get together and you do productions. So you could just list yourselves there and still assign a value to the work that you're doing or the time that you're putting in.
Thanks, Priya. And then we have another one from well, gosh, they're coming fast and furious now. Heather, and I have an opinion on this too, but Heather asked, when an opportunity arises, about how much time should creatives set aside or schedule for researching, planning, and completing an application?
Ooh, buddy. Tim, I'm gonna ask if you want to answer that one, because I feel like
yeah, there's no universal answer that can be put there. Here's what I would say from experience. Creatives kind of live in the moment. And if you know you're going to go for a grant, really read through it thoroughly. I think a lot of people find out what the deadline is, and then they're like, oh, I don't have to think about this till X day. And then you get to X day and you realize, oh my God, these questions are really long and involved. You want to make the best case possible that you are going to be a good steward of this money. And some grants, if you're applying for $3,000 from, say, the North Carolina Humanities Council, the application is pretty easy. And they don't want long answers in some cases. But if you're applying for, like, I'm going to pick on the Women's Impact Fund, like, buckle up. I mean, that's like a 25 to 35 hour investment of your time, because they ask very detailed questions, and they require a lot of financial analysis. So there is no universal answer, Heather. Here's the thing. You want to make the best case possible. Doing it the last minute is not that, especially if you have to have letters of recommendation. So read the application in full, all the questions, before you decide whether you're going to go for it or not, because that enables you to figure out how much time. But most applications, even easy ones, take 5 to 10 hours. I mean, if you're really if you're editing it, if you're showing it to people, if you're doing the financial analysis, like, you need to put in the time commensurate with the amount of funds you're asking for. And I think the other that you need to be really, really careful on is if there's a match. There are many, many grants that want to say, if I give you $10,000, you're going to match that $10,000, either from another fund or out of your own pocket. And you need to think real carefully about that before you apply.
I'll just add to that, that many organizations, let's say you're interested in a grant, a lot of organizations will let you know what that application period is, whether it's a 3-week period or whether you have 2 months to apply, and they'll let you know when it's approaching, like applications for this grant open in September. So it gives you a little bit of time to do more of that prep work and really thinking through your proposal. And then you can start, once the application's live, you can really work on those direct questions that might be unique to that application.
That's a good point. And Tim, can I just add one other quick thing to what you guys said, is just that also, again, going back to that piece about if, reaching out and having some dialogue with the funder, if possible, or if it's offered, a few minutes up front could really save you a lot of time later. That if you, like, whether it's like Tim says, just even figuring out if it's a good fit, if you just take the 15 minutes or even half an hour, if it's offered, like, to chat and say, hey, this is the idea. does that sound like it's eligible, or does that, what do you think? That, I mean, that could save you, you might decide not to go for it, and that saves you a ton of time, right? And then, or you might be able to figure out what piece is eligible and better focus your proposal that way. And then you're not kind of wondering the last few days of, before the deadline, what do they mean by this? Or, what should I put in here? What should I leave out? So again, just a little bit of upfront can really make it worth your while later.
Yeah, we have Priya for just a few more minutes. I was just going to add two quick things. One is part of why not waiting till the last minute is your computer can crash. You could have a power outage, right? I mean, you do not want to be hitting, there's a midnight deadline, you do not want to be hitting send at 11:59. And the other thing is, as a funder, like if it's midnight, the deadline is midnight, and we've had great proposals come in 15 minutes after the deadline, but the deadline is the deadline, and we have to say it's not fair to the other applicants. So when you're budgeting your time, there's no better feeling than sending in an application 2 days ahead of time or a week ahead of time. Just do yourself that courtesy. And also grantors notice that. We do. If somebody's got their stuff together and it's good and it's early, I'm like, this is somebody who's on top of it. So those are those kind of invisible points that get added on the, okay, I'm going to remember this person. Sorry, I said no. The last thing, always follow up. So like if you didn't get the grant, ask questions, and also don't argue. I had somebody who was in the top 3 for a grant we were going to give out and didn't make it right over the hill. And I was just about to email them saying, I want to help you with this. We're going to find a way to help you. And he wrote a nasty email. You guys suck. You didn't pick me. I'm the best. He talked himself out of help. So, yell at the wall, punch the wall if you didn't get the grant, but then follow up with the grantor and ask, what could I do better next time? That really helps you either with other grants or have a relationship with that grantor. Let me see. I think we have one last question, and it is, how do you know if you need to include a line item for a fiscal agent?
So basically, again, it should be in the eligibility and the guidelines for the grant that, as Tim said, you'll read and reread and reread. But like, if you're not a nonprofit and you're applying as an individual or just some other kind of group that doesn't have legal nonprofit status, you probably, if the grant says so, if the guidelines say so, you would probably need to work with a fiscal sponsor or fiscal agent. And therefore, if you're working with a fiscal sponsor or fiscal agent, I'm not aware of anyone serving as in that role and not charging a fee, because they are doing work and they're basically putting themselves on the line, guaranteeing your grant. So then you would include the amount they're going to charge you.
All right, last question is from Kenya, and I'm happy to share my experience, but Priya, she asks, how do you make a better application the next time if the grantor does not offer follow-up?
Ooh, great question. Well, I'm happy to say in my 25-year career of making grants, I've always offered follow-up and suggestions, but not everyone takes us up on it. Well, I mean, look, some of it is, it's really hard. You might go back and, I mean, I've done that. I asked for follow-up recently. I have not received a response on a grant, and I don't expect to get one. I'm not giving up though. I'm going to just call them out of the blue. But so you could try just calling out of the blue, or I think there's a couple of things. I think it can be helpful to look at who did receive funding if and when those announcements come out. And just take a look and say, it's frankly, for those of you who maybe haven't done as much grant seeking before, but like, even when you're preparing your proposal, it's helpful to look at past recipients if this grant has been offered in the past, unless the guidelines are different than they used to be. But you could look at who was funded and try to get a feel for what kinds of things the funder went for. You know, it's hard to know. Again, as Tim said, sometimes it's not that the idea is bad. It's like the proposal itself wasn't, you know, maybe the strongest it could be. And the other thing is, you know, try to go back and look at your proposal with a critical eye and just look at things like, oh, is there anything you might have done differently if you maybe had more time, or, you know, now that you've looked at what they did fund, maybe wasn't a great fit, and, you know, you may choose to apply again in future and try again, or you might be like, actually, this organization isn't a great fit for me and what I want to do, so I'm gonna, you know, not pursue grants with them again, just because it seems like they're into something different than what I do. So those are the kinds of things that I would suggest. Tim, is there anything, or Sethi, would you add anything to that?
I would say that's tough. You know, it's a difficult thing. There is a grant that we've applied for many times that we have not gotten, and they declined to, even when directly asked, to give feedback. And it is a decision. Is this a fit? Is this, you know, how many more times do I want to go back to this well? I would say a way to reverse engineer it is to go and see if they did any recorded training sessions where they talk about the rubric. That's one thing, is always, if it's offered to attend a seminar where they, you know, in advance, where they share what they're looking for in applications, either attend or watch it. But if you're retroactively looking at why did I get in, and they're not going to tell you, do that. But outside of that, sometimes it's okay. Like even today, we spent as an organization about 6 to 7 collective hours evaluating whether we were going to go for a grant, and we decided today it just wasn't for us. That going further wasn't going to be a good fit, and we were going to throw money, good time or money, after bad. Not that we didn't want the money, not that it's not a great organization. We just didn't feel like we were the best fit, and I think you have to make those kinds of judgment calls. And if an organization's not going to do it, again, that says something. It might even be a resource issue. Last thing I will say, though, is I had to do this with people that are in our incoming Creative Entrepreneurs Initiative class. Some people, their application was great, they're great, but there was just as je ne sais quoi, there was just something about another application that was slightly more compelling to the reviewers, and that's tough. We've had people tell us, your proposal was great, you just done got beat by somebody else, and that's a tough one, but it's real. You know, it's very real, because if you've got 8 slots for something and 200 applications, there are going to be a lot of unhappy people, and it happens. So, guys, lots of great questions. Priya, this was awesome. With everybody hung into the end, and great stuff. We're going to be sharing this video. We're going to actually be writing a story for the biscuit with some of Priya's tips in it. So everybody, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute and just thanking Priya, because this has been a long day for her, and she's given us more time even than we asked of her. So
You're too kind, Kim. I know it's been a long day for all of you, so thank you for
Priya.
taking time with me.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
That's very
Priya.
helpful.
Yeah.
Good to
Bye.
see you
Thanks,
all.
everyone. All right.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming. We got
Goodbye.
more convos
Thank
coming
you.
up soon.
Thank you. Sounds
Take
fair.
care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Gracias, chao.